sort of a covert monitoring program. That would make sense because, you know, in today's world, you know, it's sort of a unpredictable world, and you know, so it may be like a defensive program to try and ensure that nobody ever does, you know, succeed in unleashing some sort of virus into the food chain, whether extraterrestrial or, you know, from a foreign nation. You know, it may not be a program just aimed at preventing theoretical aliens from doing this. It could be, you know, to prevent legitimate hostile forces out there that want to hurt us, you know, from doing it too.
Randomly test animals.
Yeah, because that's one of the things people say, you know, why do the cattle mutations, why are they so random and here and there? Well, you know, if you're concerned that somebody is trying to infect the food chain, and that would be a legitimate concern, arguably the best way to figure it out is not just to focus on one area. You know, you'd secretly sample from east coast to west coast to north to south and see if it's spreading or not.
Well, I never admit it, so nobody would know the truth, and they just, somebody would be...
Yeah, it might not look like it's a whole nationwide thing because it might be just a few random selections, but I mean, it's kind of like, as I said, with the mad cow thing when that broke out in Britain. You know, they started all over the place, not just to see if the cattle were infected, but if they were, how far did it spread on a geographical level. So, yeah, Martin.
I don't know if you can answer this other than the materials that you were going through and reading in archive materials. Is there any mention of where any of this material might have gone, any hospitals, any place that would have studied maybe the viruses themselves?
The only one that's mentioned really in the documents is Fort Detrick, which would make sense. As I said, Fort Detrick, you know, plays a major role in the defence of the US. You know, it's one of the most important installations because, you know, the problem is in today's world, the enemy doesn't always look like, you know, they're not dressed like the Germans in the Second World War where you can see what they look like. You know, the enemy doesn't look like the enemy, and so, and unfortunately, you know, hostile forces are always looking to come up with another way to beat us, and, you know, unfortunately for us in today's world, biological warfare and viruses is a big potential issue, at least. And but Fort Detrick, you know, is at the forefront of defensive research into this field. So it would make sense that if you do, you know, if military did get its hands on like an alien body or several, Fort Detrick would be the best place to analyse them. So it doesn't prove the documents are genuine, but it does make sense that that's where they would be examined. So.
Right, I realize that's not your background, all that detail with the forensics of the virus, but I know that in most, I don't know if it's in all cases, but viruses usually have associated phages, which detect viruses. And if there is a phage accompanying it, is it terrestrial or is it come with the virus? I don't know how they tag along.
Yeah. Well,
each other.
yeah, I mean, again, the problem is it seems these documents, again, if they're genuine, they're more like a summary, you know, they're like a sort of bullet point summaries for whoever the briefing was meant for, you know, so we just don't...
I don't know how you really get anything out of Fort Detrick, you know, detail.
Well, no, I mean, you know...
Hospitals that would have said.
Yeah, I mean, I get this a lot, you know, where people talk about, what do you know, what you know, they should reveal it all. I actually, you know, my view is that I think the UFO subject, you know, the official story is that UFOs don't affect national security. So, you know, I think it's legitimate to investigate it when that is the official line. But that doesn't mean that, you know, it might sound strange considering I write about, you know, secrets and things that are surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act. You know, I don't get into all the, you know, other illegal stuff or anything like that. I just use the Freedom of Information Act to get stuff in my books. But when you've got a place like Fort Detrick, you know, actually the bulk of their work shouldn't be released into the public domain. And that might sound strange coming from somebody like me, but nobody wants enemies to know the potential level of our knowledge on how to combat viruses. In the same way that, you know, we don't want the Chinese knowing, for example, how high our radar systems can project to, because they just fly their planes, you know, 2,000 feet higher. So there are a lot of secrets that should legitimately not surface and should not be revealed or released.
But I agree with you, this is probably a much bigger story.
Yeah, but I think, you know, with the whole UFO angle, the official line is there's no threat to national security. So in that sense, I think it's okay to investigate it, but, you know, again, it's sort of, it's limited in what, you know, what we can get, etc. So,
Yes.
thanks.
So would you tell me the address for the website that Ryan Wood has on?
Oh, yeah, it's majesticdocuments.com.
Majesticdocuments.com?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, on the cow mutilation, I read an article in the paper saying that cow's blood is the closest thing to human blood. And if we ever had a major emergency where blood was needed, it could be filtered and used.
Yeah.
That's true.
Well, actually, yeah, cow's blood is actually quite close to human blood. But, I mean, if you were to get, you know, if you lost 2 pints of blood and you rejected with 2 pints of cow blood, you would die. You would go into toxic shock and you would die. Now, what's that?
They probably slaughter you.
Yeah, you get a hamburger or something like that. but the thing is that it actually is close enough to it cannot be refined right now, but there are a lot of similarities to it. It's kind of like, you know, a lot of people don't realise we're sort of 98% compatible DNA-wise with chimpanzees. But we don't look like chimpanzees, but we literally are like 98% of the DNA is the same. And yeah, so, you know, in other words, the potential is there maybe one day to where, you know, DNA and gene splicing could be used for all sorts of weird ways and weird reasons. And maybe somebody's done that as far in advance of us, you know, and maybe there's multiple reasons for it all. So, yeah.
You mentioned about the Spanish influenza. My own family's history. My grandmother was pregnant with my father when she caught Spanish influenza, which killed 20 million people from 1918 to 1919, far more than 4 years of World War I. She had a successful pregnancy. She and my father both survived without apparently any ill effects, but it was, I just brought that to mind. The other question I had was on the idea of the cattle mutilation. Of course, there's a lot of evidence to the cattle mutilations taking place, but if the strategy behind that is to somehow contaminate the human food supply, as you suggested, is one possibility. If there's an alien race that has the biological capacity to manipulate the food supply and contaminate it, they would also realize they've done their homework that there's large sections of the planet that don't consume meat. There's various religious groups, there's vegetarians worldwide, there's people in Asia, people in different groups. There's so many that don't eat meat. I was wondering, is there, you know, maybe there might be some other foods, corn or wheat or something else, rice, maybe other foods that may have a better future impact on the human population. Is there any evidence of those being contaminated?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of sort of specifically other types of food beyond sort of meat, but I mean there are a lot of reports of sheep mutilations, pigs. I've been on a number of investigations to Puerto Rico in search of the so-called chupacabra, and they've had a lot of like goats and weird chicken mutilations and things like that. So, you know, if you could apply it in that angle as well, I guess. But I mean, in the worst case scenario, you know, it might be we find out when it's too late what else they've infected.
It sure is taking a long time.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good point when you said about it's taken a long time for them to achieve this. Now, I mean, one way of looking at it is maybe they're not massively more advanced than us than we think they are. You know, a lot of people kind of think technology-wise, you know, they're our masters and they're way ahead of us. But there's a lot of reports where they seem quite vulnerable. In abductions, for example, you know, they control the situation and the person seems to be, you know, almost like semi-drugged or whatever. But there are some reports where, you know, the person's woke up and things have gone wrong and they're almost like in a panic, as if, you know, they're not sort of these all-powerful, masterly creatures we think they are. So who knows, maybe their presence here is actually quite limited. We don't necessarily think that it's, a huge, we think it's like this huge armada that's sort of all powerful. Maybe there's just a certain number of them, and so they're limited in what they can do and when they can do it, but then again, I mean, as I said, there's also the possibility that it's nothing to do with anything sinister. It's just when we happen by accident to be exposed to them in a crash situation, we're exposed to them, and then you die or whatever. So, but hopefully not.
It's just an interesting thought. If we went to another planet, though, we might contaminate them with what we have and kill them too.
Actually, a good point. The question was, or the observation was, that if we went to another planet and there was life there, could we infect that? Well, actually, there's a very famous scientist, I'm sure many of you know, Carl Sagan. He actually wrote a paper on this very subject in the 60s about if we one day send astronauts to Mars and there is life there, even if it's just like microbial life or insects or whatever, could we potentially kill that? And I mean, that's kind of like in H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds book, where the Martians are wiped out by our flu virus because they've got no way to combat it. So it could be done vice versa. We sort of go trampling all over Mars and wipe out the Martians, which is probably the sort of thing that we would do, so I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
Look what the Spaniards and everything else did to the Indians in Central America.
Yeah, that's right. They brought a bunch of diseases over that, the Indians in the native people of South America had no immunity or way to combat these diseases from Europe, and the trouble with us Europeans,
Let's take one more question, and then I'd like to leave some time for folks to visit with Nick at the book table in the back, and then I have a couple more announcements as well.
Did you have a question?
I'll tell you.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's too weird.
Yeah, Jim.
It's not too weird. We know somebody's doing the chemical mutilations, and whoever it is, has anybody any ideas on why they would take these cows or horses or whatever, do the strange things and then dump them in a field where somebody can find them? I mean, does anybody have any idea why they would leave evidence?
Well, that's sort of the biggest question that's asked, is when the cattle mutilations occur, why don't they just take the bodies and no one would ever know? All the farmer would know was one of his cows is missing. But it actually adds to the mystery by leaving the body there, because people, when they're autopsied, then people realise that there are organs missing, there's blood missing, and eyeballs seem to have been carefully extracted. So, I mean, one of the theories is that it's actually done to create fear, that it's designed to create fear in people, that it's a legitimate, ongoing thing. It's like almost like I won't say a warning, but to kind of get you aware of what's being done. But on the other hand, it's done very stealthily at night, as if they don't want to know. Whoever's doing it doesn't want us to know who's doing it, but it's like they want to leave a sign that they are doing it, which doesn't really make much sense. But that is what's happening. It's sort of very weird.
They're looking for the pulley balls.
They actually have kind of like I don't know, they're trying to put up a cheese club now, like where they can put up kind of a ricochet. So there used to be biocompatible poles that would make like a dinosaur and a peacock, and we were going to be beings, so we used to do that. Then there came this wedge where, there was a betrayal, and they ate it, and they were like, oh, you are. And then they do these things threateningly and to try to assert themselves in the future, but also to take there's organs, and they said they're putting like somatic and like chopping up what was our evolutionary compatibility. This is what we get, and so we put ourselves at wall instead of going forward with our evolutionary. Kind of
Okay, Tom, you had one more question. We'll let you sneak yours in.
Okay, about the chemtrail thing, all this talk and speculation, all right, so maybe they found some kind of virus, and maybe some people are upset about the chemtrails because they maybe they're coming down with illnesses or
Well,
changing the weather or hazard.
to be honest, I haven't personally researched chemtrails at all. I don't really know. I mean, I watched a few TV shows. I haven't really looked at it at all, to be honest. So I don't really know much about that.
All right, let's have a big round.